Namaste and welcome to Pods by PI, a policy discussion series brought to you by Policy Entrepreneurs Inc. I am Anupama Adhikari. In today's episode, PI colleague Lasata Joshi is in conversation with Purushottam Ojha on trade ties, Indo-Nepal trade relations. Purushottam Ojha is the former Commerce Secretary of Nepal and has extensive expertise in trade, transit, investment, private sector, and institutional development. Mr. Ojha has held key roles in public service since 1979 and has also served as a trade facilitation consultant for the World Bank and the Global Training Institute Development and Research, providing strategic advice on trade negotiation and capacity building. Lasata and Purushottam's discussion centers around the long-standing trade relation between Nepal and India. Ojha shares his insight on how historical trade arrangements have shaped Nepal's economy and ongoing challenges and opportunities in this bilateral relationship. From tariff regime to non-tariff barriers, this episode offers a comprehensive look at Nepal-India trade dynamics and future of this crucial partnership. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Namaste, this is Lasata Joshi.
Namaste, this is Purushottam Ojha.
Mr. Ojha, welcome to Pods by PEI.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. We'll be diving into the Indo-Nepal bilateral trade relationship, a vital economic partnership that has profoundly shaped the geopolitical landscape of the region for generations. Given your experience as the former Trade Secretary, your insights and first-hand experience will be invaluable in guiding our discussion. So, without further ado, shall we begin?
Okay, yeah.
Let's first start with the historical context of our bilateral trade relations with India. Could you walk us through how has the trade relation between Nepal and India evolved over the centuries? And what has been the core motivation and dynamics shaping this long-standing economic, particularly trade partnership?
Thank you, Lasata, for the question. Of course, Nepal and India enjoy very long-standing trade relations from the very beginning. In the past, Nepal's trade was limited to India and the Tibet Autonomous Region of China. Due to this very porous border, the trade with India was happening quite at large scale as compared to our trade with China. It started from time immemorial. But in the recorded history, documentation of the trade relations, it has been for the first time done in 1792 during the reign of King Rana Bahadur Shah. And that time, the treaty was very primitive type. It has only couple of components, something like each country were supposed to impose 2.5% duties tariff on import from the other country. That was one part of that very agreement, Treaty of Commerce. And second, it was the protection of the traders. If the traders' goods were confiscated or it has been hijacked or it has been taken away by some wrong element, then the government was supposed to rein on it. That was one of the area. And secondly, there was also provision of punishment to the customs officer if any customs officer levied duties more than 2.5%. That was the unique type of arrangement made in the treaty in 1792. And after that, the next treaty in our recorded document, it was in 1923, during the time of Rana Prime Minister Chandra Shamsher. During that time, it was basically Treaty of Peace and Friendship, and along with that, there was a provisions of transit for Nepal as a landlocked country. Actually, it was a follow-up of the transit provision that has been made in 1921 Barcelona Convention. Following that, in 1923, British India government provided transit facilities to Nepal. It is in a written form. And the third that you have mentioned is the treaty that was concluded in 1950, July 31, 1950. There are two treaties. One of the treaties is the Peace and Friendship Treaty, and second treaty on the same day was signed. It was called Treaty of Trade and Commerce. So that treaty basically was based on the assumptions on the perception of customs union. I mean, the customs duty to be laid by India and Nepal had to be similar. And in export from Nepal to India, even Nepal government was supposed to levy the export taxes in order to level the price of the goods in India. So that sort of thing was there, and it was for a period of 10 years. And after that, we had a treaty in 1960, which basically was a single treaty of trade and transit. And following 5 year period in 1970, it was renewed. And for the first time, with the follow-up of the government of Nepal and the persuasion of the government of Nepal, India signed three different treaty in 1978. One was the Treaty of Trade, and second was the Treaty of Transit, and third was the Agreement of Cooperation to Control Unauthorized Trade. So those three agreements were signed in 1978. Even today, the treaty trade and transit arrangement between Nepal and India is based on those three treaties, and those treaties has been amended from time to time, and even today it is effective on that way.
That's an excellent summary of the key points from the historical context. Based on the evolution you outline of the bilateral treaties between Nepal and India, I would like to understand how the current Nepal India trade and transit agreements compare to the past iterations of these bilateral agreements. From your experience, have you observed any clear departure or continuities in the established Nepal India trade relationship compared to the past?
Yeah, you are right in the sense that there is continuous evolving of the trade arrangement between the two countries. If you compare the provisions of 19, there was a sea change in 1960. During that period in 1950, Nepal was supposed to levy the taxes, customs tariff, customs duty at par with Indian customs duty. So there was no independent tariff applied by Nepal. That is and second, establishment of Nepal Rashtra Bank. It was some time in 1957, 56, 57. Before that, foreign currency earned by Nepal used to be deposited in Reserve Bank of India. The payment used to be received by the RBI, and also used to be done by that very institution. So a kind of monetary independence was not there. Independent trade policy was not there. So Nepal got out of that clutches in 1960, and during that time, Nepal Rashtra Bank was already established, and even the provisions that has been made for equalization of the tariff, it was abandoned in 1960 treaty, and the name of the treaty was itself was changed from the Treaty of Trade and Commerce to Treaty of Trade and Transit. And if you see the Treaty of Trade in 1978, the rules of origin criteria for Nepalese product to enter into Indian market, it was quite stringent. It was stringent up to 1995. So Nepal's export were destined to Western countries like European countries and America. The export to India was very much minimal due to very stringent rules of origin criteria. So that very criteria was changed in 1996. The revision done allowed market access for the Nepalese product in India under the basis of the rules of origin defined by the government of Nepal itself. So that was a sea change in the provision of the Treaty of Trade, but that very arrangement could not last very long. It lasted only for 6 years, and in 2002, we were subjected to renegotiate the treaty, and then rules of origin criteria was imposed, and there were certain products that has been put under the tariff rate quota, or what we call the quantitative restriction. So what we see today is that the tariff is not such a problem between Nepal and India, because the tariff is, all of the product from Nepal to India, it gets duty-free tariff preferences. But the problem here is about non-tariff barrier like quarantine, food test requirement, tariff rate quota, rules of origin, and several uh, arrangement. Non-tariff barriers have been created, and that is also playing a role in non-realization of the trade potential, export potential of Nepal. That is there. So previously it was tariff, as well as non-tariff. But now tariff barriers have been lowered, but the non-tariff barrier have been raised. So that's why Nepal could not make good progress in export of the goods to India as well as in other countries.
Your explanation helps paint a clear picture of how the provisions around custom duties, monetary policy, and rules of origin have shifted significantly over the decades, impacting Nepal's economic autonomy and export opportunities. I would like us to focus now on rules of origin. First of all, what is rules of origin? And given the complex evolving nature of rules of origin between Nepal and India, how has it impacted Nepal's economic development?
Yes, when we have this preferential trade agreement with India, it started during 1970s. There are two provisions. One is the agriculture and primary product that gets duty-free access in both countries on a reciprocal basis. Nepalese goods as well as the Indian goods categorized under 14 different headings. Now it's 16 different headings. It gets duty-free access to each other's countries. Another sector is about these manufactured articles, which India provides duty-free access to Nepal. So first I would like to clarify about the rules of origin criteria. Any preferential trade regime, the preferences is given to the product that has been originated in the country, in the participating country or participating party or contracting party. In order to confer the status of origination, certain rules are defined. Say, for example, under Nepal-India Treaty of Trade, it is the rule. The current rule is 30% value addition, uh, four-digit changes in the customs tariff heading, and there are certain operations even after completing these processes. There are certain operational procedures that cannot be conferred as the origin, like if some product, if they have the value addition 30% or the changes in the customs tariff heading, it is, if it is simply due to slicing, cutting, freezing, this type of operations, making dust or something like that, grinding, that does not confer the origin status. So and there are certain rules. The current arrangement is that there is need of having 30% value addition, changes in the customs tariff hitting at four-digit level, and should not have gone through on insufficient working. That is there. In 1978, the material content provision was there. That means any product that qualifies to get duty-free access into Indian market, it has to have 90% material content of either Nepal or Indian origin. That was impossible for Nepal to manufacture product with 90% Nepalese material content. That is why the provision mentioned could not be realized in action. So later on, it was decreased from 90% to decreased to 80%. Then it came down to 50% as well in 1991 when the treaty was renewed. But even then, Nepalese goods could not meet this criteria. In 1996, during the Gujarat Prime Ministership, what we call the Gujarat Doctrine, it was non-reciprocal provisions accorded by government of India, particularly to its neighbors. So under that scheme, the treaty was revised in a way that any product that has been that says that it is manufactured in Nepal, and by the authority designated by the government of Nepal, in that case, that product will get duty-free access in India. So after that, we had a lot of industries coming in Nepal, but those industries, rather than really generating employment in the country, industries came to getting benefits from duty differences between Nepal and India. That sort of industries emerged in Nepal, like vegetable fat, acrylic yarn, zinc oxide, and even Kodak film manufacturing industry. So there are certain industries that were really not adding value, rather they were getting benefits out of the arbitrage, duty arbitrage between the two countries. So that's why the concern was raised from the Indian side, and we had marathon negotiation during 1998, 2001, quite extensive and intensive negotiations were held, and after that we had to agree on rules of origin criteria, and the rules of origin criteria that are set in 2002, it still prevails today. So several products from Nepal qualifies under that very rules of origin criteria. It is the non-tariff barriers that are creating hassles in export. So that is the situation as of today.
Indeed, the non tariff barriers are creating concerns with the trade dynamics between the two countries. But let's dwell a little into tariff structures differences between Nepal and India first before addressing the impact of non tariff barriers. Are there any significant differences in tariff structures between the two countries? And are these key concerns in our trade dynamics? What are your thoughts on the main issues arising from these disparities and how they influence the economic activities between Nepal and India?
I think that there should not be much differences in the tariff in practical terms, because if there is a difference in the tariff structure, then a kind of illicit trade or the informal trade happens, because there is people want to take advantage of the duty arbitrage. Say for example, one of the major product that has been exported to India over the last couple of years, or over the last decade or so, is sunflower oil, palm oil, soybean oil. These three oils are exported in a large quantity. And if you see the trade figure of last over the last 3 4 years, out of the 3 years back, total export of Nepal was worth 200 billion rupees. Out of that, 96 billion rupees worth of export was only due to these three items. But this product, the raw materials, we get it from outside. Although it qualifies under the rules of origin criteria, because they bring it raw or crude oil, and then they process it and send it to the destination market. On that process, mm, the rules of origin criteria is made, but the real value addition or the employment generation out of the export, it is questionable. It was due to the duty differences, because those product, if it is imported by India directly from third country, it would attract 35 40% duty. But if it is imported through Nepal, then it is zero duty. That means there is duty difference, and there is quite big profit for the exporter from here. That is why this type of export or this type of trade has to be curtailed, and the real trade has to happen based on the raw materials and the value added product from Nepal. That is very much important. So what we see that besides there are a lot of informal trade happening between the two countries. It is due to the price differences and even customs tariff. If we impose high customs tariff on the imported goods, then in that case, due to this open and porous border, people are motivated to export or to import informally. And in one study, it has been said that the volume of informal trade is almost half of the formal trade as well. Although there is no systematic study done on this, and some of those economists and researchers, they have done some guesstimate. According to the guesstimates, the volume is quite high. The volume of informal trade is almost half of the formal trade. So what I see that getting the higher tariff and creating more barrier in trade, it encourages people to trade informally.
Earlier, you mentioned how open border is unique arrangement in Nepal's relationship with India, and the informal border trade is a less discussed issue. So, earlier you mentioned how open border is unique arrangement in Nepal's relationship with India, and informal cross-border trade is a less discussed issue. However, with the huge scale of informal trade, which likely is providing a crucial livelihood opportunities for border communities, especially the economically marginalized, do you think Nepal and India can find an amicable way to address challenges of smuggling and illicit trade without jeopardizing livelihood of border population?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that we can do to curb down the informal trade. I cannot say that it can be eliminated because due to this porous border and the frequent movement of the people without any passport or visa, and even the open border everywhere, almost 18,000 kilometer in east, west, and south. One of the measures to curb down it is the tariff harmonization. So there should not be much differences in tariff. If in one country if there is a high tariff, in another country if there is no tariff, then it will have the incentive for the traders, rogue traders, to take the route of informal trade. That is there. And second is the pricing policy. Um, the prices of the goods should not be much differences between the two countries. So we have the glaring example of petroleum product. Whenever the petroleum product in Raxol and Birgan, the price if it is differed by 5, 6 or 7 rupees per liter, then the people find it easier to transport the goods illegally from one point to another across the border. They will make living out of that. So that sort of thing is there. And even you see, say for example, even agricultural product, if the cost of the agricultural crop is higher in Nepal and if it is cheaper in India, then people have the incentive to transport it illegally. So the pricing mechanism and how the price can be equalized, near to equalize, I don't say the completely equalize, but the price difference should be in a way that it doesn't support informal trade or illicit trade or smuggling. And third, it is about regulating border enforcement. Although it is a very long and porous border, but both the countries and the law enforcement agency can work together, can cooperate each other to control the unauthorized trade. So, active intervention of the law enforcement agency that can also be checked. But the complete elimination is not possible.
So far, we have discussed the key strategies Nepal and India can explore to address the challenges of large scale informal cross border trade. Now, let's talk about non tariff barriers. According to you, what are the major categories of non tariff barriers that currently hinder formal trade between Nepal and India?
Of course, one of the great export of Nepalese goods is the SPS related barriers, sanitary and phytosanitary. One is the quarantine, animal health, plant health, and food test. These are the major hurdles. Just to explain it, you see, if even there are some irony in this. Say, for example, from Koshi province, we export ginger, tea, coffee, even the broom. Whenever there is, say, for example, in case of ginger, what we have observed that if there is bumper harvest in India, like in Sikkim and Northeast India and Himachal, then the barriers is raised on their side. So they want Nepalese ginger not meet the required parameters or required test parameters. And the same thing apply to the Nepalese tea as well. We have seen from the past. If there is underproduction in Indian states, then in that case they take all the goods without any problems. So these are the things that we are facing as of today.
And what can Nepal and India do to enhance cooperation and address the non tariff barriers hindering trade between the two countries?
In order to address this issue, we need to enhance cooperation on test and certification. First, we need development of Nepali standards, and the Indian standards are there. One of the areas is to harmonize those standards, or Nepal adopt the standard ISO standards. What you call this ISO certification 17,025? There are ISO standards. We have to follow that so that Nepali standard is accepted. And second, it is about the test and certification facilities. So the test and certification facilities should also be at the international standard so that those certified product is accepted by other importing countries. And third, it is about concluding mutual recognition agreement. That is very much important. Mm, And also non-tariff barrier, it is related with the tariff rate quota or the quota restrictions. The product under Nepal-India Treaty of Trade, it is under the quota. So it is non-relevant today, because if you see the export volume of these four products, that is vegetable fat, acrylic yarn, zinc oxide, and copper product, their export is much less than the allocated quota. So there is no meaning to maintain this quota restrictions. And there are other barrier like non-automatic licensing. Say for example, if someone from India wants to import vegetables or some agricultural product from Nepal, first of all they have to get the license from their authorities, from their SPS authorities, the quota with quota. And so this sort of things, this is not free trade in that sense. And in some cases there are local taxes as well, that is also hampering the export of Nepalese goods. So what I see that, although some mentions in the bilateral treaty of trade about dealing with the non-tariff barrier, but the exercise is not sufficient, the consideration is not sufficient, and both government now needs to sit together and really analyze the problem. What are the real problems and how it can be resolved? So at least at the bilateral level, if we could resolve this issue, I think that will have great potential of increasing export to neighboring countries.
Indeed, both governments need to proactively analyze the problems and find solutions through close collaboration. Now, moving forward with the next question, while going through Nepal India Trade Treaty, I came across unconditional most favored nation. Can you explain this provision and whether Nepal actually benefits from it?
Yeah, actually, there is one provision in Article 3 of the Treaty of Trade that mention, if any contracting party, that means either India or Nepal, if it provides more preferences to any countries in terms of the customs tariff or quantitative restriction, the concessions or the facilities will be automatically available to the other country. That is the provision of EMFN that you have mentioned. So that is one of the issues that needs to be reflected on the review and revision of the agreement. Due to this provision in the treaty, it has become difficult for Nepal to negotiate and conclude agreement with other countries like Bangladesh or Thailand or whatever is there. Because if, say for example, we have Bangladesh and we have trade interest with Bangladesh as a neighboring country, but we can't have that concessions provided to each other, because if we provided some concession to Bangladesh, then it is automatically applicable to India according to the provision of the agreement. So in that case, really the Bangladeshi exporter will not benefit, and the benefit will go to the Indian exporters. So what we see that this type of arrangement that has been made in back in 1978, it has been continued till now, and it needs to be reviewed by both the government, because it might not be a problem for India, because it provides duty-free access to all of the Nepalese products. So there is no question about that. But Nepal would not be able to sustain that, because providing duty-free access to all Indian products will be difficult for Nepal to be around.
In order, from Nepal's perspective, what key provisions in Nepal India Trade Treaty should be reviewed and renegotiated to address the challenges faced by Nepal? And what potential solution could the two governments explore to enhance the trade relationship in a more balanced and mutually beneficial manner?
What I see that there are certain provisions that needs to be looked on during the process of review and revision of the agreement. I understand that government of Nepal is doing homework to that. One of the area that we have to look at, as you have indicated, the MFN provision is contained in Article 3 needs to be revisited. Second, it is about the tariff free import of the Indian agricultural product. India provides they have the capacity to provide subsidy to the agriculture sector, very high subsidy in comparison to Nepal. Although their level of subsidy is lower than the European countries or America or the developed countries, but in comparison to Nepal's capacity, they have much higher capacity to provide subsidy. And those subsidized agricultural product in India, they are getting easy market in Nepal. There are other reasons as well, but one of the reasons behind the fallback of the Nepalese agriculture is the cheap import from India, from neighboring country India. It is formally and informally we get a lot of Indian products in Nepal. So across the border, if you see in our Tarai and across the border in Bihar and UP, the cost of production of the crops is quite different. Is that there is no similarity. So in that context, another area that we have to look at is about imposing customs tariff on agricultural product in order to protect the Nepalese agriculture. So that is also one of the area that we need to look at in the revision of the treaty. And third, what I see that trade dispute. There are several because we have India is the largest trade partner for us. Around two-thirds of the trade takes place with India, and one-third of the trade takes place with the rest of the world. So, given the volume of the trade transaction, there are several disputes, but the mechanism to address the dispute is also not very much effective. So, we have to make an effective mechanism whenever the dispute arises. It has to be the fast track methods of resolving the dispute.
Beyond just focusing on trade in goods, what are other sectors or areas of cooperation that Nepal should prioritize in economic negotiation and partnership with India?
There are several other areas, such as hydropower, maybe tourism, education, health, that we can have cooperation between the two countries. So that also could be made a part of the trade negotiation. And another is the investment. Of course, investment, we need more investment from outside, foreign direct investment to develop the industrial core in the country, to increase production, to develop more technology. And a few years back, India was the largest investor in Nepal. Now it is taken over by China. But still, the total volume of FDI coming into Nepal each year, if you see the figure published by the UNCTAD World Investment Report, Nepal is on the lowest among South Asian countries, leaving aside Afghanistan and Bhutan. We are on the lowest ebb. So we have to create an environment where the investment comes, foreign direct investment comes, and the investment, it helps to create job, it helps to run the industry, to establish industry. All these things has to be looked in totality rather than just looking only the trade from one single perspective. We have to have the trade in services, we have to have the investment as well as the cooperation for development of the potential product in Nepal.
From our conversation so far, I guess that Nepal and India trade relationship is clearly a mixed bag of fraud with challenges, but is also critical for both countries. Now, let me bring into another factor into this trade relationship, which is Nepal's graduation in the LDC list in 2026. Do you see Nepal's LDC graduation impacting our trade relationship with India? And at the same time, do you see opportunities for Nepal to potentially renegotiate or devise Nepal India trade treaty to better safeguard its position post LDC graduation?
Yes, after LDC graduation, preference is given to least developed countries in by the international organizations or the other countries. It may affect. Say, for example, European Union, they have everything but arms initiatives in favor of a least developed country. So that will go away. But while talking with India, our bilateral agreement is not between the least developed and developing countries. Rather, it is between the two neighboring countries. So in that sense, the provisions that has been laid in the bilateral treaty it will not be affected even after LDC graduation. But we have to remain alert in the sense that whenever we are going to negotiate or renegotiate the treaty of trade, Indian side means exert pressure that now we have already become developing countries. That is, India is also a developing country, so we are at par. So why should we give you more preferences? So we should do it in a very reciprocal basis. So that sort of proposal may come up. That kind of pressure may build up. So I think government of Nepal should be aware about it and they have to be prepared. The discussions are going on about giving some transitional period for the least developed country graduating LDCs to fully go into the developing studies. So maybe we can ask similar things with India as well in that case. But what we see that fundamentally our agreement, our treaty with India is not on the status of LDC, rather it is on the status of neighboring countries. So I think after LDC graduation, there will not be much difference for Nepal in its trade with India. And one of the benefits for Nepal is that two-thirds of the trade is with India, and the trade will not affect after LDC graduation. And even if you take the case of export, last year almost 68, almost 70% of the trade was export was to India. So the export will not much be affected. Only 30% of our export will be affected. So I think that is good side of the story.
Given the evolving global trade landscape and the need for Nepal to adapt its trade agreements with neighbor to modern practices, what key reforms should Nepal prioritize in renegotiating its bilateral trade and transit treaties with India?
Of course, now the trade, you see, the international trade regime is it is dynamic. It is changing over the years. And if you see the situations 2 decades ago and 1 decade ago, and now it is quite different. Now the international trade is also under the WTO. Some of the big countries they are just taking a inward approach and introvert export. Sorry, we have to the least developed countries and developing countries they have to take a more forward approach because some of the developed countries and big countries they since they are rolling back from the open trade regime. So we have to be very much careful for that. And since the WTO related negotiations they are quite time consuming and delayed in the process, it is better for the countries to open up trade within their doorsteps with the neighboring countries, either sub-regional or the regional level. So for that purpose, what I think that we have a big market in South Asia, and as well as China itself is a big market. So we need to engage more with the neighboring countries, China, India, Bangladesh. These are quite big market for Nepal. We have to have more favorable trade agreement and the current arrangement on the trade and the current arrangement in the transit. It has to be reviewed and revised to suit the modern approaches and modern practices. For example, digitization of the trade processes, it is taking shape and it has also helped in reducing the cost of transactions. So we have to go further. Still, our trade agreements and the transit agreement they are based on the traditional processes. So we have to transform from that very traditional process to digitization. Automation should be there, and there should be better coordination among border agencies. And we need to move into paperless environment. So we talk about artificial intelligence, big data, and all these things. So the internet-based or the IT enabling environment, we have to work on that very environment. So in Nepal, we have implemented national single window that links all the participating stakeholders in one platform, single window platform. So we have to have the cross-border single window as well. That will reduce the time and the process, and it will also help to get rid from the unnecessary process, redundant processes. And in order to implement this, we have to have the review and revisions of the bilateral treaty of trade and bilateral treaty of transit as well, according to the modern practice, to fit it into the modern practices.
Given your additional perspective on the need to focus more on sub regional cooperation in South Asia, should we go beyond bilateral and focus on the regional bloc as well for the trade purposes?
Really, what I see that is a quite a nice idea. We start from bilateral and we go for sub-regional and the regional. But unfortunately, in South Asia, the SARC process is stalled since over the last 10 years. And the BIMSTEC is also not moving very well. It is also moving at a very snail pace. And the emerging concept is about sub-regional cooperation, South Asian sub-regional economic cooperation. And these four countries, what we call the BBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal, they have signed the motor vehicle agreement, but it still has to be made effective. If the cooperation at the sub-regional level could be developed, if it could be built up, then it can work as a building block for the regional cooperation. So we start with the bilateral, then go on sub-regional and then regional. So I think that is the best option that we can have today rather than going through multilateral process.
We have covered a lot of ground on Nepal India trade, but as we wrap up, could you share what you see as some of the most important steps the Nepali government should take in the near future to improve trade?
It is, I have mentioned most of the things. I think I am covered most of the things over here. We have to build up our productive capacity. That is very much important. In order to participate effectively in the international trade, it may be bilateral, regional, or multilateral trade, we have to build our capacity to produce. Without production, we can, it may be goods production or it may be services production. And for that to happen, we have to have the investment environment. For that, there are other factors like policy, trade policy, investment policy, and governance, and all these things, policy stability. These are very quite important things in order to attract more investment, either from outside or from within the country. Until and unless we have the investment, we cannot generate production. And we have to remember that production makes a country great, but not the consumption. Consumption cannot make a country great. So our current trend is more in consumption. We get more remittance from the migrant workers, from the migrant outside, and it is increasing consumption within the country, but without any production. So that's why we have to reverse this process. We have to increase production. Increment production means that will give solace to the consumer, and it also at the same time helps to build up our export capacity. So more focus would be on production rather than in consumption.
Thank you, Mr. Ojha, for this insightful discussion on the steps Nepal need to take to build its productive capacity and strengthen economic cooperation with India. Thank you, Mr. Ojha, for this insightful discussion on the steps Nepal needs to take in order to build its productive capacity and to strengthen economic cooperation with India. I appreciate you taking the time to share your valuable perspective on this important topic.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Pause by PI. I hope you enjoyed last night's conversation with Purushottam on trade ties, Indo-Nepal trade relations. Today's episode was produced by Kushi Hang with support from Nirzan Rai, Hriday Sapkota, Vibhuti Botto, and me, Anupama Adhikari. The episode was recorded at PI Studio and was edited by Hriday Sapkota and Lasata Joshi. Our theme music is courtesy of Rohit Sakya from Jindabad. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast. Also, please do us a favor by sharing us on social media and leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to our show. For PI's video-related content, please search for Policy Entrepreneurs on YouTube. To catch the latest from us on Nepal's policy and politics, follow us on Twitter at tweet2pi. That's tweet followed by number 2 and PEI. And on Facebook at Policy Entrepreneurs Inc. You can also visit pie.center to learn more about us. Thanks once again from me, Anupama. We'll see you soon on our next episode.